5.
All right, you guys can start whenever you're ready.
Well, the first thing we need to know is how many salt marshes has the town of Fairfield restored, and how many acres of salt marsh?
Well, a little context. You have right now areas that we have had for salt marshes in the past before they were filled and diked. It was roughly 1,000 acres. And Pine Creek had over 640. When we started marsh restoration, it was down to 17 acres out of the 640 that had not been diked or filled. So we're now looking at it's about 250 acres that could be maybe 25% of the original that could be restored, and we've done about 150 so far.
That's just at Pine Creek. Are there others?
Yeah, Turney Creek, 14 acres, Ash Creek, 9, Horse Tavern Creek in mouth of Mill River, Southport Harbor, 5 acres. It's very small creek systems that have had essentially been diked, tide gated, and then we would come in and adjust the tide gates or modify them or replace them with SRTs.
Why did the town of Fairfield think this was important enough to start doing 30 or so years ago?
Well, they're looking at the state of Connecticut embarked on an open space acquisition program for the municipalities. This is back in the 60s when conservation commissions started. And the town of Fairfield acquired about 600 acres by the time I got here in 1971. And once acquisition had been made, they tried to figure out what to do with the property. It had to be managed. It had to be open space regulations had to be adopted. Had to be distributed among the different town commissions, parks, recreation, conservation. So they asked the forestry school at Yale to assist in drawing up a plan for open space areas, and they did. This was the Pine Creek and Mill River watersheds, an ecological guide to open space land use that came out of the Yale School Forestry, and it was essentially the agenda for the Conservation Commission that the town endorsed and proceeded to acquire more open space and to begin to manage the areas. And when they got into looking at management, they realized in terms of the coastal wetlands that they were now, because they had been diked, had been filled, the properties were built on in many areas, and with occasional large storm event, they would be flooded out. So the town built flood control dikes across the channels, isolated the marshes, and that soon brought about significant changes. It eliminated the tide, all the tidal flushing. The salt water was gone. The rain would leach the salt out of the peat. You'd convert your vegetation from salt tolerant to fresh water. The loss of scouring power of the tide that coming in and out would allow sedimentation of the creek channels. The sand, road salt sand coming off out of the storm sewers into the marshes would infill with sediment. You would then result in a backflow or backflooding condition of the marshes, where the water couldn't get out right away, and it would sheet flood across the marshes into backyards. And when that happened, because the sediment had filled the channels and the Phragmites root systems had eliminated the ability of fish to come in and eat the larvae pupae of mosquitoes. So we had created tremendous mosquito production, great mosquito breeding habitat when we diked the marshes. When we diked them and the vegetation changed from the low salt hay Spartina grasses to Phragmites, we embarked on annual fires that would burn the 20 acres in 20 minutes. It would burn the garages and cars and pools, decks, behind the houses. The loss of scour and allowed the debris to get hung up in the dike, tide gates and culverts, All the bridges soon silted in. The water that flooded, sheet flooded the marshes often backed up in the storm sewers and came out the catch basins along the curb side of the road and flooded the roads. All of this, was picked up by Yale, and these were symptoms of problems. That the town did achieve flood protection for about the 25-year storm, but in doing that, it introduced ecological loss of the Pine Creek, Turney, Ash Creek marsh systems, and created public health, fire hazards. Once you look at what to do about that, the answer is essentially to restore the natural conditions to the degree that you can. And the first thing they recommended was removal of the dike systems. When I got here in '71, the contractor was just completing the Pine Creek dike, for example. And the town had anticipated that it would first dike off the marshes, strip off the peat, excavate the sand and gravel underneath for highway construction, road purposes. Then they would backfill the excavation with garbage for waste disposal. And then they would create a park or some public, recreational area on the top, golf course or whatever. Those plans went awry when the state of Connecticut, I think in '69, adopted the State Tidal Wetlands Act. That was the end of the marina expansions, the dumps, all the wetland development that property owners had anticipated when they provided easements for the town to put a flood control dike up were now all but eliminated. And when the Conservation Commission sought funding for removing the dikes, it ran into a lot of concerns by Flood Erosion Control Board as to how will you provide flood protection for the homes, the properties that we've achieved through dike construction. So when you remove a dike, where's the new dike going to be? That meant they looked at that, and that was to essentially the initial proposal was to extend the existing dike system from the ends of the cross-channel structure all the way around the marshes up through the estuary. And they quickly realized that it was not possible. First, to do that, you would need to acquire an easement, construction maintenance easement, from all the property, hundreds of property owners around the marsh who backed up to it. And the only area you had from the upland owner's point of view was the marsh. And the marsh systems that we have are elongated. So as you start laying out 50, 60-foot wide base for your dike in the edge of the marsh, you're covering, filling the thing that you're trying to restore. You're eliminating it. We also didn't anticipate that we would be able to acquire the easements, and no one was proposing to condemn them. So we were left with a couple of alternatives. One where the town had old dikes. As the town was developed since First World War, it extended its development into the marshes, into the coastal floodplain. And as it did so from the upland edge, say from the Post Road down, it would put in a dike system across between high points across the marshes. And we'd have, in the end, by the 70s, we had about 3 redundant systems. So where the town owned all the marsh within those redundant systems, it could maintain a high ground dike configuration around the upland edge and then remove the cross-channel dike below it. Once they got to public and private property, they could not build the dike around the marsh system. So then they went in and modified the tie gates. They enlarged the number of gates and removed the old flapper gates and put on self-regulating tie gates. And that allowed the salt water to go back into the marsh systems, restore all the scouring, eliminate the phragmites, eliminate the fires, eliminate mosquitoes, and restore the fish, waterfowl, shellfish, wildlife associated with them.
How long did it take from when the tide gates were changed or put in to when the marsh started showing real signs of being restored?
The day after. Before the commission actually did the work, it had to get permits. and it also wanted to document the work that it did. So it coordinated a really good project with Fairfield University. Dr. Salvatore Bongiorno, he's a biology professor up there, and he established the pre-construction, if you will, before any changes were made. He went out and established plots for obtaining data of the existing conditions. And then as the marshes were opened up through dike removal and through tide gate management, he would monitor those plots and published Nearing and Warren grad students from Conn College and from Yale, Sacred Heart University, Fairfield University, have all been down here to work. This is back. Commission started in '71. We decided what had to be done and where to begin it, and then we got the Pine Creek Marshes opened in '79. So it was a roughly applications went in '74. It was 5 years to get through the regulatory process. One of the reasons it was so long is the residents. For example, you have to go get a permit from a coastal site plan review, permit from Town Plan and Zoning Commission, and when you sought the approval for the application, public would often comment that it had anticipated that the lots, their private lots, that we are now going to flood, if you will, put back to a natural tidal condition, were essentially their retirement fund. And they were not going to have that. Others, where the town had acquired an easement with the assurance that the easement for the dike, once constructed, would allow the property owner to fill its land behind the dike and build out upland development. When that happened, the property owners who provided the easement and now saw it all going away sought relief from the courts, and we ended up several years in court trying to resolve problems. And in that time period, we lost the funding to after we breached the 100 foot of the dike. We want to remove another 900 feet of it. We lost the funding to do that, and that 900 feet of dike was going to provide the fill for a new dike structure up along the upland edge so that we could advance the restoration effort further. When that funds ran out, we soon switched to self-rating tide gates, and that's the much more cost-effective approach.
And if you saw ecological and other benefits almost immediately, did those benefits continue to build and accrue over time?
Oh yeah, you'd see the elimination of the Phragmites. The salt hay would. Well, here's interesting. When you dike a marsh, the marsh systems that we have are predominantly peat, from peat and muck. From peat's roughly maybe 3 to 5 feet thick over muck going down to 35 feet. When you dike a marsh off, you eliminate the tide, and you got to remember that marsh system, salt marsh system, is sustained by upland and tidal sediment being brought in, plus the organic matter from plants that are growing there. Well, when you dike it off, you lower the water level in the peat, and you allow the peat to drain. And as it drains, dries out, it oxidizes, and it subsides. In some areas of Pine Creek, we went down 1.5 feet, 18 inches since it was diked. You put the tide back, a normal tide, back into an area that has subsided 1.5 feet to 2 feet, and you have a lake at high tide. And we're now finding that instead of opening everything up through all these redundant dike culvert systems, we're now trying to fine-tune it with valves, so that what's happened when we first restored the marsh, all the water would come in through the tide gates, run up to the head of the marsh 1.5 miles away, and it would essentially submerge the inland edge and upper marshes first. And as they filled, They would then come back and they would fill the middle lobe and then the lowest lobe. And by the time it was just beginning to get over the top of the marsh on the lowest lobe, the tide had dropped down there, was going out. So we were restoring marshes to lakes, mudflats at one end, no restoration at the other end, and the intermediate lobes of marsh. These are about 30 acres in area. Was fine. Was actually really quite amazing what was happening. So we found out that we now need to valve off and we're allowed, provide a good opportunity to do it in the intermediate dike and culvert systems, so that we can reduce the amount of water that's flooding the upper marsh systems, hold back some of it to feed the middle marsh, and have some of that held back into the lower marshes, trying to reproduce essentially what nature did through friction and channel constrictions, in the normal tidal marsh system. So once you go in and mess around with a natural system, it's very difficult, probably not even possible in many instances, to restore the natural condition. The longer time things change, the surface of the land changes, it lowers, the plants change, and they're all there growing in equilibrium with the tide that's coming in, twice a day.
So
Once you change it, you realize that you're not going to get back to an original condition, but you will get back to something that is, around here they consider it aesthetically pleasing. You'll have ospreys nesting. You'll have salt marsh sparrows coming back, where you had no more fires, no more frag, no more tremendous mosquito breeding problems. Mosquito breeding is still a problem, though, because in the upland edge around the marsh, all our streets, all our storm sewers are draining off into the headwaters of those salt marshes, and all that debris, the sediment and wrappers from fast food, all the things that are coming out there are still creating problems and obstructions in the channels that obstruct the fish from getting back in there. And these wet areas are breeding to a point where about every 15 to 20 years we have to go back and clean them out, open them up and restore tidal flushing into them.
So once you reflood the marshes, is there measurable biological changes that start happening right away? Like I said, as soon as you do it, it starts happening. But like, what starts happening first? Do you first start seeing fiddler crabs, or first phragmites die? First
thing, we open the water just runs up into the channels. We found kids coming in and reporting that there were crabs and minnows in the catch basin outside the movie theater in town center, and they were there because a mile and a half away we found an old covered storm sewer pipe that had not been located when we went in. We capped them all when we started, before we allowed the water back. So we found a couple instances where, the first day you've got fish and crabs and shrimp moving into town center. So when you see the tide coming in and flushing out the ebb tide and the flood tide deltas that are beginning to restore themselves over time, you're stripping off the muck, the black mayonnaise, and you can see the sand and gravel coming in, being exposed beneath it. Each growing season, frag would drop about, depending on the salinity, from 1 to 3 feet. So if it's 13, 14 feet high when you start, each year you're seeing about a 3-foot drop gets down to an equilibrium point around 6 feet, where it holds on for maybe 4 or 5 growing seasons. And then it's using up all its reserves in the roots and stems, and it just, bam, goes right down to, within 10 years, you would not know that you were out on a restored marsh. Well, most people would not. They'd say, oh, this is great, this is natural and normal. It's actually Spartina altiflora that they're walking in. No more Peyton's marsh, because the Peyton's requires less, it's tolerant for less tidal flushing than they get. That was an interesting experience. When you when you eliminate, restore the marsh tidal flow, and you eliminate the Phragmites, in the marsh system that's diked, you can walk anywhere. You can even drive a Volkswagen. Kids have done that out on the marsh. It hardens off as it dries. When you put it back and kill the frag, you kill the root systems that also hold it together within 2 years, where you could walk out at high tide and not get the water over your ankles. You need hip boots to get through the soft peat and muck that has lost its root structure from the systems. And then you get a lot of erosion where the tide is turning on a channel and scouring the area wider. All these are just little changes you see that over time have an effect on the restoration effort to some degree.
Do you have a basic written tidal marsh restoration management plan?
In terms of a plan, when you're starting out, you say this is what we want to do, and then you have to adapt to reality. This was what we thought we were going to do. Just remove the cross-channel dikes and put it back the way it was. That plan was shelved pretty quickly, and then you realize that you can't get the easements, you can't build the dike, and then what are you going to do? Then you modify the tide gates that you have, and when you do that, you have to manage the gates by size, number, so the cross-sectional area will allow the water back. You have to have them shut off automatically so they don't flood anyone out once you open them up. But the main, and you need to have documentation. That's probably the most important thing, to see what your successes and failures are, so that you can use them, as to jump forward in a better direction. But once you've got the frag out, you see that what this really needs is tidal flushing, and your management efforts. You'll get the poles up for the nest platforms. You'll be ditching the marshes every 15 years in some of the isolated pools where they're breeding mosquitoes. But the main thing is to maintain the tidal flushing. So you've got to go out when people throw debris out in the back, and the ice picks it up and brings it in the ditch. You've got to go out and clean the channels of obstructions. But after that, you're looking at just maintaining your dikes, maintaining your tide gates, the water control mechanisms, and monitoring about once every year the marsh systems comprehensively, to make sure that they're flowing. And the biggest problem then becomes encroachment of backyard, filling gardens, kitchen middens, all the little dumps that all the packing boxes, and you take a little shed dormer, and you put in a new bathroom, the old one ends up in the marsh, all the Christmas trees, all the garden cuttings, it becomes a rather mundane, ho-hum condition, after the tide has reestablished itself.
Is this kind of tidal marsh restoration something? Do opportunities exist for other communities in Connecticut along the Sound to do this?
I've seen it in Milford, Stratford. They're working with the state at Milford, Silver Sands State Park, for example. They've been at that for years and been very successful. You're looking at marsh restoration, I think, in the river between New Haven and West Haven, up by the what's that? Is that the Mill River?
I think it's the West River.
West River, yeah, correct. They've got, I think, a dozen tide gates, and I think they've retrofitted 3 SRTs on them to, and you'll see restoration efforts that the state has done up and down the coast. I mean, all of the state parks on the coast have had attention, restoration, and when the funding is available in the towns, all of them that are amenable to it, to carry down. What you do have to do though is, what we had tried to do was take the dikes out and eliminate the need for maintenance wherever possible. because that's the hardest thing to find, the funds to do. So to the degree that you can eliminate the dikes and the need for maintenance, that's a good thing. What we've ended up doing is, because of the tremendous environmental and economic cost to do that, we've adapted to maintaining the culverts and tide gates. The old metal culverts that would corrode, rust away, we've relined them with plastic sleeves, to extend their service life. All the metal, we use sacrificial zincs on the steel, the mechanisms that would normally rust out, in 10 years, and we'll get 20 to 30 years service life out of them.
That's a pretty comprehensive answer. I think I don't have any other questions.
We asked about other salt marshes.
Right. We have the planning process. We have the actual restoration process. We have the beginning and the end.
Yeah, you'll see support from especially the property owners who used to be plagued with mosquitoes and fires. All of a sudden, they're gone, and a muted tide. Because remember, this is not full tidal action. It's flushing of the marshes without flooding of protected property. And they very quickly, when you see an addition go up, you'll see a picture window on it over the marsh, or the deck is being extended toward the marsh, off the side of the house or the back of the house. The improvements on the property are usually on the marsh side of the lot, and you'll see in the real estate advertising. Restored marshland adjacent to beautiful views over spacious open space property complemented by the restored tidal wetlands, and it's a boost for everyone. No more fires. Fire department hasn't been called out in probably 20 years for a marsh fire. Mosquitoes, every 15 to 20 we have some significant problem. We're working on them right now in all our marsh systems.
This is conservation management planning that has had a lot of benefits beyond just biodiversity.
Yes, right. Is there any place you'd like to go further that still needs to be done in Fairfield?
Yeah, we have.
What would you like to do next as far as marsh restoration?
The next thing, Pine Creek, is we learned a lot when we did that. When the dikes went up and the marshes were isolated in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, for years the tidal prism had been eliminated. The tidal prism is a volume of water that rushes in with the incoming tide into a marsh basin and then goes out. And that tidal prism determines the depth and width and length of the water distribution system in that marsh. Thousands of feet of channel, of ditches and natural channel, are all based on the amount of water that is and the velocity coming in and going out twice a day in a time period. Well, when you dry out the marsh, eliminate the tidal prism, not only does the marsh oxidize, actually subside and get lower, and all the channels inside the dike begin to fill up because they're not scoured. We also found that all the channels outside the dike also began to fill up. And where the natural channel would give you at low tide, say 3 or 4 feet deep channels, and folks lining properties on Pine Creek would have their boats. They would have keel boats, sailboats with keels, and along their dock at low tide. And when the dikes went in over the decades, the sediment infilled the channel so that it went from 3 feet deep at low to 2 to 1 to maybe 6 inches at some point. And we noticed when I got here in 71, I could walk across the mouth of Pine, way down at the end, at the mouth of Pine Creek, and it was below my knees. And you go through there today, and it's going to be up to my chest, almost to about up to the last week it was up to my chin. But what we have found is that the restoration of that volume of water and the currents, the scouring, the things that go with it, have been clearing out the channel, so that over the years, boaters would go from a deeper draft vessel to a shallower draft vessel, and they're now to a point where they're saying, we've got to dredge the creek to reestablish the boating access we had to Long Island Sound. Well, they may have to dredge it, but the first thing that we should be doing is looking at restoring the marshes. We still have 100 acres to go, easy, in Pine Creek. And when you restore that acreage, you are increasing to a restoration condition the tidal prism and the volume and velocity of water that's moving in there. So the first thing if you want to increase boating opportunities in a marsh controlled system is to restore the marshes, restore the tidal prism, which will naturally excavate and scour the sediment out of these old areas, and reestablish the profile and section of the channel. And if that doesn't work, because other things may have changed, and the barrier beach may have shifted or something, then you can contemplate artificial dredging. But the first thing to do, in my opinion, is reestablish the natural system, the functions that the forces that create and maintain the ecosystem, the coastal, the system that we enjoy.
So are there any plans to restore the last 100 acres up there?
Plans are in the Conservation Commission. They have not gone beyond that.
And what would that involve?
That would involve putting in essentially replacing the old culverts. Most of our culverts were designed in size just to get the upland stormwater runoff out. They were not intended to allow thousands of cubic feet of water to come in every day to feed the marshes. So what you need to do is enlarge the culverts, the size of the culverts that are there, and put on self-regulating tide gates so that you will allow the water to come in and flush the marsh for 3 feet to maintain a healthy marsh, and close before they flood any of the areas. We found it's interesting. Once you dike the marsh and you eliminated scour, you've gone to Phragmites, and all the sediment now infilling the channels in that dike marsh. You've also, as I mentioned, you lost the discharge capacity of your storm sewer systems, because the storm sewer pipe at the head wall, at the stone concrete head wall, ends, and all the sand and debris, leaves, everything just fills that right out. And as soon as that happens, and the sediment fills all the channels that aren't getting flushed anymore, and you have the sheet flooding and the back flooding into the storm sewers and coming out to catch basins, the town then looks at what used to be an asset for discharging stormwater runoff away from upland conditions into a problem. It's now back flooding and making it worse. So the town would look at this system and say, okay, here's the center low valley, if you will, the marsh basin. Used to be an asset, now it's a liability. So we're now going to extend our storm sewers, bypassing the entire marsh system out into the lower undiked portions of the estuary. And when they do that, they introduce all the junk, all the pollutants, everything is, instead of being cleaned up through the marsh system, it's dumped, by flushing it right into the water column of Long Island Sound, which is the least capable of remediating, cleaning up those pollutants. But they also found that the pipes that were installed could no longer handle the capacity of the watershed when there was a high tide and a heavy rain, and the water would pop right out of the catch basins or wash they push the manhole covers right off the rim. And I'd go out in those storms and watch. Of course, we had the tide gates closed on that marsh that's restored, and the water would come from the storm sewer system out through the catch basins, down the gutter, into the driveway cuts, down the backyards, and into the salt marshes that would have water levels about 3 feet lower than the marsh, than the water in the storm sewer system. So in what we've now are or using the marshes, beginning to use the marshes again for storm sewer discharge, when you have the ability to close off the tide on an approaching storm, you can protect hundreds of acre feet of water storage volume can be provided as a reservoir, if you will, for all the upland runoff coming into that marsh in several hours before there's any flooding of the streets, roads, or properties. I mean, that's one of the real benefits, and we're now beginning to see the design in terms of drainage works, that they're beginning to appreciate the value of the restored marsh for disposing of upland runoff that had been bypassed at great expense and effort to.
So as the culverts naturally deteriorate and have to be replaced, that would be the time then to.
Yeah, they would not have to sustain them over time, but the old pipes that were bulkheaded to prevent water coming in from the marsh, from the diked, destroyed marsh, that water now is flushed out the sediment, and they could now use those pipes to allow the water to go out as originally intended into the marsh channel, where it would be detained during a high tide and heavy rain until the tide dropped and it could then discharge. But this is a mindset it takes decades to make these changes after the investment's made and the permits have been obtained, but you're just learning that if you go back and try to maintain the natural system, you will be far better off than having to try to duplicate it in so many individual ways. We duplicated the natural marsh by running the fire department out every other day for 20 or 30 marsh fires per season throughout the town. The health department was out with treating insecticides in the areas that were not only controlling mosquitoes and killing them, but I mean other non-target organisms were affected by it. The storm sewers that introduced all the sediment into the marsh, just aggravated the flooding conditions, the upland flooding conditions, and all of these are new obligations that roles and expenses the town had to take on when it achieved the storm tidal flood protection from a dike system. When you look at it now, those dikes that went across the marshes for decades allowed more and more development, more intensive development throughout this coastal floodplain, to a point where now the investment was made by the town and private owners as if they were living on North Benson Road. And in fact, and North Benson Road is not flooded out every 10 years with a coastal storm. But what we're seeing pretty much is 10 years or more. Total inundation of these areas behind the dikes, because the dikes were so small. They didn't want to make them large, didn't want to block people's views, breezes, lose their beaches, didn't want to condemn any of the easements that would have been required to really provide some long-term flood protection.
So the next steps at Pine Creek would be what?
We'd like to see the 50 acres east of the dike in behind the fire training station off Fairfield Beach Road. It's called the Hump Dike. Tide gates redesigned, allow the tide in. The par 3 golf course marsh, the Old Dam Road, 50 acres down there that should be restored. It's we know they can be. We've monitored when the gates they would slowly corrode, and the conventional flapper tide gate would slowly corrode and allow more and more tide in. And that's a good thing from conservation's point of view. That's bad if it produces flooding from the Flood and Erosion Control Board's point of view. So to document that you can have the best of both worlds, we would leave the gate alone as it is installed at the McLevy or behind the par 3. McLevy Buellin is a budding property owners. And we'd put in monitoring wells all around the marsh, from the tide gate all the way back up through the smallest ditches. And we'd monitor the water levels with a core gauge staff like the Geological Survey would use. On every storm, we monitor precipitation, and we would then plot rainfall over high tide, and all of this time with flood protection. And you can just, as the gates holes enlarge, the gates deteriorate, you get more and more water back, and you can just plot the curve over time with the water increasing, and you're looking at what else is coming with it. All the minnows, the crabs, the oysters, the clams, the waterfowl that associated with it, the wading birds are all coming back. And you then document the lines, the high tide mark, where the barnacle, all the plants and animals that grow in accordance with the tidal condition. And you can show that you can have flood protection and marsh restoration at the same without any problem. The problems aren't the technical ones that I've encountered. The problems are the people ones. You can figure out how to make a tide gate, how to build a dike, where to put it, how to modify what you're doing, and correct the circumstances, improve them as you go. The hardest part of the job is the decisions that affect people and their responses, their wishes to ameliorate any adverse effect from their point of view as much as possible. It isn't easy, because when you put the tide back, you have to understand that people cut fire breaks behind their homes to protect their homes. When the Phragmites came in after the dike went up and the marsh was destroyed, well, all those fire breaks, to maintain a fire break in frag, you have to cut it all the time. You can't let frag grow and then think you're going to go in and just cut it down, over some Saturday afternoon. So when they mowed it, they got to a mowing point, and then you'd find their gardens went in, their lawns went in, ornamental plants went in, on the marsh into the peat. And then you come in and say, we're the Conservation Commission, and we propose to restore the tidal wetland in this marsh system. It's been diked. It's going to eliminate your fire problems, great. Eliminate your mosquito and your flooding problems, great. Well, what it also does is eliminates all the improvements they've made in that backyard marsh. And they see the tide comes in, it isn't clean. It's got to all the oxidation, all the plants and animals that are in that diked peat are now going to be submerged. They're going to be saturated all the time. And you're going to find paraffin-like oil bacteria are going to produce iron reducing, oxidizing. You're going to see orange and oily kind of, and you think that there's debris has been dumped there, but it's not. It's a natural condition. It's a transitional condition from a diked dry marsh to a undiked saltwater, from freshwater to saltwater condition. And when the ornamentals go and the garden goes, the residents then begin to express dissatisfaction. Conservation Commission went in and looked at them, and there were rhododendron, white pines, and they went back and replaced up to $500 all the vegetation, the trees and shrubs that had been salt killed. If there was a location for it, a high ground location on the property, they did that. Riverside Drive, we did probably 10 or 15 properties out of maybe 20, 25 down there.
That's great. This is plenty. Let's stop here.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we were looking for.